It's a nice day for a walk outside though, right? So my name is Robert Russell. I work with first year experience in transition programs. That is a mouthful of a name. So the first thing I like to do is to let people know about what it is we actually do. We abbreviate our department with FYE. Our name is a bit misleading. We do not work with just first year experience. First year students. We work with students that are transitioning into college, whatever that may mean, and any student that needs help with their academics at any point in their career. So we work with students who are freshmen, we work with students all the way up through grad school, and everywhere and anywhere in between. Some of the stuff we do specifically, as an academic success coach, we have coaching appointments, which are one-on-one appointments, to literally talk about anything academics with students that they need help with. This is the kind of position that did not exist when I was in college. My freshman year was a dumpster fire. I could have absolutely used something like this. Okay. We offer academic skill workshops, free tutoring throughout campus, everywhere. We cannot stress free tutoring enough for students. We have a specific location on campus where we have tutoring from 5 to 9 p.m. in just about every single subject you can think of, Monday through Thursday. Typically, when students try to find their own tutors, it's a game of text tag, and then something will never work out. Like, that's the way it works. So we tell students all the time that you can go get a free tutor whenever you want to. We have transfer and international student support. I run the transfer student program in our office, and we do monthly events. We have pizza parties, we go to movies, we have game nights, anything and everything in between. Try to create resources and communities for different groups on campus that need it. And then a lot more, as we'll talk about. I've been in the office only since May, and I've only been in Nebraska since May, so I'm still new here, but I was a college instructor for about 8 years. I taught everywhere from 2-year colleges with 1,300 students to 4-year schools with 50,000 students and everywhere in between. So a lot of what we're going to be talking about today is going to be based on these 4 things. In order to succeed at a 4-year institute like UNL, we need to talk about resources and time management, study skills, and logistics. Okay? So the first thing is resources. And one of the things I like to tell students when they come see me all the time is that in high school, in smaller colleges, there is a series of resources that exist for students, nets, as we like to call them, that are there to catch students all the time. So if you slip through one net, boom, you have another net to catch you, and so on, and so on, and so on. And the idea is, especially in high school, with smaller colleges as well too, there are fewer students, there's more faculty and staff, people know you, they can actively reach out to you, okay? This is one of the benefits of a smaller school. It's one of the benefits of high school, it's great. But at a place like UNL, resources exist, absolutely, but these nets are all over the place. And the idea is that you have to actually be proactive and go find the resources, okay, to be successful at a place like this. This is one of the hardest transitional changes that we see students grappling with when they come here. At a school like UNL with 25,000 students, it is just impossible for us to assume we will know what any student needs at any given time. So you have to be vocal about what you need. Now, we offer a ton of resources, like our office. There is a math resource center. There is a language resource center for any language on campus that you need. There's tutoring for all this kind of stuff. There is Oasis, which offers, I'm going to get their name right exactly, Office of Academic Success and Intercultural Services. There's counseling and psychological services. I mean, literally anything and everything you can ever need, but you have to go out and ask for it, okay? Just to reiterate too, coaching and the stuff that our office does is not unique to UNL. Just about every 4-year university is going to have some form of our office. These are new things. Universities and colleges have put more money and resources towards offices like ours in the last 5 to 6 years or so. Again, I didn't have anything like this when I was in college. Sometimes my title is academic success coach. Sometimes we're called learning specialists. Sometimes we're called academic specialists. We exist at any single place. We are resources students should use, and y'all should use when you have an opportunity to do that. One of the things that I'll be talking throughout this presentation is students at 4-year institutes often mistake being independent with they shouldn't be asking for help. Those 2 things are not equal, right? You're here at a school this large, it's okay that you don't know stuff, it's okay that you ask for help. This is one of the places that you can do that. And this is an intimate setting. This is a 30-minute one-on-one meeting at our school that we meet with students. Anything academic you want to talk about. Study skills, time management, test prep. We have some students that just want to come in and complain about the professors. It's whatever it needs to be, okay? We offer workshops that are free, and I understand that workshops are the most boring thing you could probably think of, but these are study skill workshops. So I was teaching for 8 years. The other coaches in our office have a fantastic wealth of knowledge of academia. We put these study skill workshops together specifically, so when you leave these workshops, you have skills you can start implementing right away. We know exactly what the professors want to see you do, and that's how we build these workshops. And just about every university is going to offer some form of free study skill workshop as well too. Right? Tutoring, again, free tutoring is free. There's no reason why students should be taking advantage of this, especially at a place that we'll talk about as big and as massive as this, with classes that might go lightning fast in a way that you're not used to. Tutoring is essential. Okay? Peer mentors. Schools like UNL offer a range of peer mentors, and these are usually upperclassmen who have gone through the things you're going through and can kind of give you advice. This is typically not academic related, although sometimes it might be that, but typically this is social related, right? When we talk about transfer students transferring to a four-year university, it's not about academic skill. I mean, the fact that you've transferred to a four-year university and you're going here means you can do the academics, right? The biggest issue tends to be social, right? So peer mentors are people that have gone through it, that have experienced what you're going to experience or what you're currently going through. Again, for our transfer program, is something that I lead. We have a couple peer mentors for transfer students specifically. They can get matched with a peer mentor. The peer mentors have office hours, and the idea is that people can just show up and ask questions and talk about college life and whatever it needs to be. Okay? Next is time management. This is probably the biggest challenge facing students transferring to a four-year institute, how you manage your time. For example, how do you manage a load of more classes and more coursework in a class that is 3 times the size what you might be used to? We have quite a few students at UNL who have a single class that is bigger than their entire high school graduating class, right? Like that's very, very common. Time management is what it all comes back to. This is what we as coaches at UNL spend a lot of our time talking to students about. This is not something that you just know how to do. You don't just wake up and know how to use a planner and study your time, and it's okay that you don't. So this is one of the things we spend a lot of time on. One of the things we'll talk about with students a lot is you have to remember that there's only a certain number of hours in a week. So only 168 hours in a week, there's only 15 weeks in a semester. We're already at UNL, we're already in week 8 finishing up right now, so there's only 6 weeks left starting next week, right? So how you manage your classes is less about the content of the classes. And this is something that I say to every single student. I don't need to know any of you, but you're all capable of passing every single class if you give it enough time and energy, okay? College, especially at a place like UNL where you're learning so many different things, it's okay that you don't know this information. Like that's expected, that's why you're taking these classes. And if you don't spend time with information, why would you do well in a class, right? So the idea is that if you spend time in a class, every single one of you spends enough time, you can pass every single class. I firmly believe that. And it again comes back to time management. We often talk about priorities in our office, starting with class. Class has to be priority number 1 when it comes to time management. You have to go to class, which usually seems like the most obvious thing in the world, right? But you'd be surprised. And if you have a class with 200 students, we see this all the time, students will come talk to us and say, well, I don't really need to go because the professor doesn't know I'm there. And fair, maybe they don't actually know that you're there in a class that big, right? But the idea is that you are actively missing out on your education. We calculated in our department that at UNL, for every class you miss, it is $150 that you are throwing down the drain, right? And that usually totally changes students' perspectives about missing class, especially if you're paying for class yourself, right? Next, after class, is exams, papers, and projects. Then we have study time. This is a formula that we tell students all the time. The amount of time you should be studying each week is 2 times the number of credit hours total you have. So if you have a 12 credit semester, you should be studying for 24 hours in a week. If you have a 16 credit semester, you should be studying for 32 hours in a week. okay? And I see some of you shaking your heads, and the reaction that most people have is, I do not have that much time. The reality is you probably do, you're just not using your time efficiently, which we'll talk more about in a few minutes. Job is obviously important. Then we have clubs or organizations, sleep, eating, grooming, and laundry, and fun. And these things can kind of get mixed around a little bit at the end, depending on the order of importance. For me, sleep is, it's up there. Yeah, it's up there. And we show people this quadrant graph here, which I'll just go through very quickly, but in the top left, it is urgent and important. These are tasks that you absolutely need to do. The next one on the right on the top is not urgent, but important, right? So some schoolwork that's maybe due next week that you need to get done, but it's not due tomorrow. Down here on the left, it is urgent and not important. So maybe an email that you need to respond to, but it is not life or death, right? And then down here at the end is not urgent and not important. Fun, okay, we usually put over there. Each of these quadrants is important. And one of the things I like to instill in students when they come see me all the time is that you deserve to have a social life. You deserve to have free time. The knee-jerk reaction that college students have often at a place like UNL is, I need to be in the library for 8 hours at a time. You don't, and quite frankly, your brain will turn to soup pretty fast after about 3 or 4 hours of trying to do anything, okay? Each of these quadrants is super, super important, but in moderation. That's when we talk about a study schedule. This is the best tool that you can have at a place like UNL that goes rapid fire. Now, this sample schedule is about 15 credits, we'll say, okay? When students get a schedule for the first time in college, the reaction that everybody has is, look how much free time I have, right? I mean, that's generally what everybody thinks, okay? The reality is, and another little formula that we like to use here is the 80-20 formula. In high school, we talk about 80% of the work for a class is done in the classroom, 20% is done on your own. It is flipped at a place like UNL, meaning when you see a schedule like this is only 20% of what you need to do in a given week. 80% is not shown, including if you have a job, if you have dedicated study times, all that kind of stuff, okay? I like to talk about the idea of abstraction of time, and this is something that we have to actively learn about as students at a place like UNL. When you're thinking generically, oh, I should really study later today, right? There's a really good chance you're not going to study later today, because what does that even mean? I should really study later today. You haven't said what you're going to study, where you're going to study, or when you're going to study. So then it's really easy for your brain just to override and be like, you know, or like on a Saturday, I have all intentions, like I'm going to do some work today, and then it's 5 p.m. and you haven't done anything, right? I mean, that's this idea of abstraction of time. So when we build schedules with students, we want it to look like this. And the reaction that most people have at first is, holy cow, this is a lot of stuff, right? But I see this, because I've been doing this for a while, as this person has Tuesdays and Wednesdays where they have nothing going on after 6 p.m. They have Friday and Saturday nights completely to themselves, okay? To be successful at a place like UNL, you have to manage all facets of your time, okay? So for every credit hour, so if this person's English class is 3 credits, that means they need to spend 6 hours a week, in theory, studying for that class, okay? Now, this is not a hard and fast rule. There might be some weeks where you have 1 hour that you need to spend in a class, right? You might have some weeks where it's 7 hours. But the reality is you have time specifically focused for this class. Then, as specific as you can be, for example, if we know that from 2 to 3 p.m. every single day, you're going to work on math homework. If something were to come up and you had missed that, it's not just, oh, I should really make up some study time later. It is, no, it was an hour of math that I missed that I have to make up, okay? That is the way to succeed here. It's very easy for people, I think, to scoff at this and say, no, I'll keep it all in my head, I'll remember it. And the first semester at a place like UNL, sure, you might be able to do that. You might be able to just get by, but it comes eventually to a point, it comes to a head where it is too much. And if I asked any one of you, think about everything you have to do for the month of November, it's impossible. Our brains can't handle that, right? That's why we rely on something like this to make sure that we have scheduled blocks of time devoted to this. So when we build stuff like this, we obviously schedule fixed blocks of time first. This person has a pretty consistent work schedule, right? This person goes to sleep at 11 p.m., which must be nice. They have a floor meeting for their dorm because this person lives in the dorm, et cetera, et cetera. Then we have classes, we have flexible blocks of time, so this person wants to go to the the gym and shower, et cetera, at 8 a.m. You schedule the things you know you have to do first, and then anything that's flexible after that, and then leaving some time unscheduled every single day. The idea of this is it's okay to front load your schedule. This person has nothing to do on Friday and Saturday night. That is awesome. Good for them. And that's perfectly fine. You shouldn't have to sequester yourself inside because you think you need to be doing work. If you are efficient at this, you can have plenty of free time. Okay? Next, I want to talk about study skills. So one of the things that study skills are my bread and butter. This is what we do as coaches. These are the 3 things you need to look at. And time management we already talked about, but note-taking and reading are also important, okay? So really quickly, the other thing I want to say about this is cramming, right? We all hear the word cramming, and at some point, every single one of us thinks that we do our best work at the last minute, and I am here to tell you that that is never the case, ever, okay? I was an English teacher. That's what I taught. I taught writing and English classes, and there's never a scenario where somebody did an essay at the last minute where it was better than somebody who spent 2 weeks on an essay. It does not happen. You think that way in your brain, but it doesn't work that way. The other thing about cramming that happens is we convince ourselves that behaviors are good. You cram for an exam. So you spend all semester, you have long-term information, you're remembering stuff, and then you forget you have a test and you cram. What happens is, as I like to visualize it, is you have this layer over your brain now of crammed information, and you can't access the actual long-term information, okay? So what happens sometimes to students is you cram, and then you take a test, and then it just so happens that whatever you crammed was on the test. So you say to yourself, yeah, okay, I do my best work under pressure. The reality is the next test is probably not gonna be that way, and I've seen this every single semester. Then the next test, nothing you crammed is on the test, and you get an F, okay? The reality is cramming, it blocks your ability to actually recall all of the stuff that you really do know deep in your brain, okay? When we talk about time management, I want you to think about a line, and at the end of this line, let's say we have a test, okay? A lot of the stuff I'm telling you about today and how to succeed at a place like UNL, it seems like it's extra work if you've never done it before, spending more time up front, studying, looking at your notes every week, which we haven't really talked about yet. The reality is it saves you time, and it saves you anxiety, and it saves you heartache in the long run. So imagine we have this time, and at the end of it, we have a test, and you have all good intentions, okay, to do some prep work for it. And yep, okay, look, I'm doing some prep work, and then, oops, I decided I wanted to go out and do some stuff and not study for 4 weeks and not really look at anything. And the reality is, now you're cramming. You have a test coming up, you're cramming, and then we have this little represented student figure sleeping at the desk, meaning that they probably did not do very well on the test, okay? What I'm suggesting here when it comes to time management is you can spread out your time throughout the semester. You still get free time. You still get free time, but you do not have that anxiety of stress of cramming at the end there. And you have better long-term recall. I would never promise anybody what they would get on a test, but if you were consistent every single week about reviewing materials, you will not need to study as much right before an exam because you have better long-term recall of information, okay? This is a graph we like to show students about reviewing. We call this the forgetting curve, and immediately that blue line, immediately after class, if you never review the notes again, okay? The way that the amount of stuff you remember as the semester progresses is practically nothing, okay? And a lot of students at a place like UNL, they view note-taking as this static thing. You don't do the reading before class, you go into class and you take notes, so you don't really understand the information you're writing down, and then you put those notes away. You don't look at them again. And then 2 weeks later when you have an exam, you pick up those notes. And the reality is, you don't know this information, right? If you didn't know it when you took the notes, you're not going to magically wake up and know the information. So now you have to relearn everything from scratch, in addition to what you did before and after that as well too, okay? So at a place like UNL, we tell students that, you know, this person reviewed notes in the red line right after class, but if that was the only time they reviewed information, you can see that forgetting curve goes down, and so forth and so forth. It is only the student who is consistent across the semester about looking at information who is going to remember what they need to remember for their exam. Note-taking, I recognize that this is the probably the most boring thing you can ever talk about. I get that. I am a note-taking nerd. I love talking about note-taking because when students come in here to see me and they say, I want to talk about study habits, to me, it all comes back to note-taking. And like I just said, if you are taking notes but you don't understand what those notes mean and then you're moving on with your life, why would you do well on an exam? And a lot of the question I ask students, and I'll ask you, and it is a trick question, but answer honestly, how many of you would say a week before an exam is enough time to study? Honestly. Probably most people, right? The reality is, if you have been consistently reviewing your notes all semester, it is. But for students that aren't doing that, like I mentioned, for students who have written notes down and don't understand what anything means, you're like, let's say you have a test that covers 4 chapters, and you don't actually know that information. That means that you're trying to relearn yourself 4 weeks of information in a week before an exam. When you think about it like that, that is kind of impossible. And that's when cramming and anxiety starts building up, okay? So note-taking is directly tied to studying and course preparedness. One of the things I push on students all the time, which we'll talk about, is you have to read. If your professor assigns reading in class before class, you have to do it. And we'll talk more about that in a minute. But you have to take notes before you go to class. You have to take notes in class, and you have to review those notes after class. I call this a very boring title method, but it's called the 3-step note-taking method, okay? There are a lot of note-taking methods out there that have very fancy names that I'm not gonna name. They're fine, but a lot of those very fancy note-taking methods, students get so obsessed with making sure they're doing the method right that they're not actually focused on the notes themselves. So this is a devised method that is pretty simple. Step 1 is you do the readings before class and you take notes on those readings. You go to class for step 2 and you take notes in class. And step 3 is reviewing and organizing your notes after class. That's it, okay? This is simple, but it is the most effective thing. When I see students who go from 0, they're not doing any of this, to starting to do this, the results are instantaneous, okay? How much more information they're ready to recall and put into the brain. Step 3, the reviewing stage, we're not suggesting here that you need to spend 8 hours a day looking over your information. You know, I'll tell students, like, give yourself a half an hour to an hour after a lecture, review the notes, make sure you understand it. That's it. Because again, if you don't understand the material now, you're not going to magically understand it in 2 weeks. Okay. Next up is reading, which is probably as exciting for you all as note-taking. Okay, I get that. You have to read to keep up with information at a place like UNL. The attitude that a lot of students at a place like this have, is that reading assignments are typically not graded, right? So those are the assignments that we can get away with not doing. The scenario that I see far too often is that a student says, okay, I have some work to do before class, I'm gonna do the reading as well too. And then it gets closer to class and they say, okay, I don't have time to do the reading, but we're gonna talk about it in class. So I'll go to class and then I'll catch up on the reading after class. Then they go to class and then they say, well, I don't really need to read the book because we just talked about it in class. And then they stop reading the book. And I'll have students that'll spend, it's midway through the semester and they've never once cracked the book, okay? This is problematic because 1, this is about you understanding class material. Your professors at a place like here, they don't have to assign a textbook. They're assigning a textbook because they're saying to succeed in this class, you have to come to class, but you also have to read on your own, okay? And in fact, it's a bold statement, but going to just class and having somebody talk to you for an hour is not necessarily the best way to learn. The expectation is that you have to take the information your professor's giving you and figure out a way that it makes sense to you. That's the whole point of education, okay? And what it does, if you're consistent about the reading, is you have better long-term recall of information. This is what it's all about. At UNL, at a 4-year institute, if you're majoring in biochemistry and you take a basic chemistry class, you better believe that you have to be able to recall stuff from that chemistry class semesters from now when you're in an advanced class. It's not just about memorizing information for the test and moving on with your life, okay? That's not what it is. So reading is where that starts. By not reading, we tend to see students all the time snowball into a really disastrous area. Because by not reading, you're not keeping up with the class. And then it can be a very easy logic leap at that point for some students, like, well, I'm not reading, I'm getting the information, to I don't really need to go to every class because I get what's happening in class. This stuff is really, really, really a dangerous precedent, okay? The reading is mandatory, that's why your professor is assigning it. It can seem like busy work, but students all the time have classes where there are no reading assignments, right? I mean, those classes exist. If your professor is assigning, it's because it's critical to you understanding the material, okay? Reading triggers thinking and critical thought, and skipping reading assignments also negatively affects your ability to participate in class. And at a place like UNL, even in some of the large lectures, the expectation is that you have to participate. And if you have not done the reading, again, as somebody who was in front of the classroom for a long time, it is very obvious who did not do the reading, because those students tend to slink down in their seats and avert their eyes whatsoever because they don't want to be called on, okay? Next is logistics. When I talk about logistics, transitioning to a four-year institute like UNL, I'm talking about four things: class size, getting to know your professor, navigating campus, and where you study and do work, okay? So class size. The class size is, I mean, you could have classes here of 20 students or less to a class. There's some intro classes that have upwards of 100. I think there's an intro to business class that has almost 200 students in it, okay? That is a monster leap. And if you're only used to classes with 20 students or less, how do you succeed in a class that size? Well, number one is you show up. And again, the attitude that students can have is, I disappear, nobody knows I didn't show up. That might be true, but it's about your education. So you not showing up only really affects you, right? If you don't show up to every single class in the semester, your professor still has a job, right? You're the one who is negatively impacted by that. Two, in a class size that is much larger, you have to be proactive. So in a smaller class setting, in smaller colleges, in high school, it is very common that your professors are going to get to know everyone because there's so few people that it's easy to do. In a class like this, you have to be proactive. You have to go out of your way to talk to professors. If you don't participate directly in class, staying after class to ask your professor a question, sending them emails, going to office hours, talking to your TAs. This is how you're proactive in a class this size, okay? Finding study partners, huge benefit for classes this size. Find people in the class, have consistent study groups, make sure you're going over information together. You should still also be following up with the professor as much as you need to be, but this is also a great resource to survive a class of this size, okay? Put in the work before and after class, so like we talked about, be consistent about the reading. You're gonna pay more attention in class and be more involved, obviously, if you're doing the reading and know what's going on, right? Take notes, review those notes. And be consistent and don't fall behind. I think a large lecture class can scare students sometimes, and when they feel behind, they will stop going because they don't want to feel more behind. The worst thing you could do is to stop going to a class, okay? Be consistent about your attendance, be consistent about keeping up with the readings. If you feel like you're falling behind, talk to your professor, go seek them out. Which leads us to our next point, know your professors. Again, you might not have to do a lot of this work in a smaller college. The professors will do this work for you. At a place like UNL, if you have a really big lecture, you have to be an active student. You have to go out of your way to meet your professors. Professors love it when y'all come to office hours to see them. And professors end up sitting, a lot of professors end up sitting in office hours by themselves, wishing more students would come, okay? The benefits of getting to know your professors, there's too many to name, but professors know of internships they can recommend to students, jobs, study abroad opportunities, anything and everything. If you're the student that is actively getting to know your professor, they're going to recommend this stuff to you. I see this all the time. Student gets to know a professor, they ask the professor if they know of any internships in the field, and they do, and they are now a front runner because they're the ones who are being active and asking about this stuff. This goes back to the very beginning of the presentation when I said at a place like UNL, you have to know what the resources are and you have to be active and seek them out, okay? Communicating regularly is probably the best thing that you could do, even in a large lecture class. Sorry I couldn't make it to class today, is there anything I missed? Also knowing who to contact. For some of your large lecture classes, your professors might tell you to talk to the TA in class, so that might be your point person, okay? But even if it is the TA, forging this relationship is key. You might not, in a class of 200 students, get to know your professor as well as you'd like, right? But the idea is that you are putting yourself out there. Your professor, regardless of the class size, is the person that designed the class. They're the one you should be going to with questions about the class first. If you have questions about the topics, the subjects, how to study, anything and everything like that, you go to them. Navigating campus. I think a lot of students come into a place like UNL are not used to the size of campus and the fact that we have two campuses, right? We have City Campus, which we're on right now, and we have East Campus. Knowing how long it takes you to get from class to the union, from the parking lot where you park to class, how long it's going to take you to drive in the snow to get to school. This is all stuff that I think students don't actively think about, but can, benefit you greatly, okay? Which leads into this next point as well, too. So students that transfer and transition to four-year universities, especially who live off campus, have a tendency to go back home between classes, right? And we see this all the time, where they'll say, okay, I have a 2-hour block between these classes, I'm just gonna go home. And what happens when that student goes home? They nap, they watch TV, they do anything but, okay? And when we talked about that study schedule earlier today, the best thing that you can do is utilize the time. You're already awake, you're already on campus, figure out where and when you want to study. There are so many different opportunities. Some people do a lot of really great work when they're in like a cafe setting or in a busy place. They like to be surrounded by that energy. Great. There's also really quiet places on campus where you can do work, okay? Sometimes, like in a few weeks, the quiet places on campus will no longer be quiet because everybody is there studying, okay? That sort of stuff happens. But knowing what works for you at a place like this is huge. The benefit of the size of a campus like this is that just about any type of study environment you could need, there is on campus. There are nooks and crannies everywhere, in every single building that you can study in, okay? And I think that's it. The last thing I just want to remind you before I say goodbye, I think, is back to this idea again of resources. The number one thing that students have to realize when they come to a place like UNL is it is in their hands. I think it's a very freeing thing to think about that, okay? We have people that look out for students. The nature of our department is we look out for students. But at the end of the day, you're the only person that can hold yourself accountable, okay? If you make a study schedule, nobody is going to be looking over your shoulder saying, you're supposed to be studying English right now, okay? The only person that's going to do that is you. I think that's a really empowering thing because when you do really, really well in school, there's nobody you need to thank but yourself. That is awesome, okay? So I left some I'll be leaving some business cards in the back if anybody wants to reach out if they have questions about anything. Yeah, I think that's it. Thank you.